So I want to take a turn here and pick up a little bit on something that Tyrone mentioned in his opening statements, what I think has been termed intersectional advocacy, right? This idea that we really, it's just not about this large umbrella of, the LGBTQ communities. And I often try to use the word communities because we are, right, a myriad of communities. And when you look at race, you look at gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, many groups nationally, right, and even locally, many cities were really concentrating on marriage equality. That was all that they were really thinking about. And we know that there are many other issues, just from what we've talked about here, that we're concerned with, that families in particular are concerned with. And so how has that been sort of heard from national organizations for whom this is a turn? This is going to be different in terms of how they do their work. They can't sort of be focused on one issue because at the end of the day, we're impacted by all those issues. I just don't show up and one day I'm Black, the other day I'm a lesbian. I'm all those things at all times. So it is really important that we address the work in a way that takes that into consideration. And what is the conversation happening around those pieces? I know we've talked a little bit about this, Jim, in terms of people really wanting to be focused on one piece of the work, and that's it.
Well, and you can't be. I mean, I look for Lambda, and the highest in the marriage cases ever took of our docket was just about 30%. Our docket, the majority of cases have always been workplace cases. If you can't make money and feed your family and pay your rent, your marriage is going to suck. So it's, so I mean, you have to have all of those, you have to have all of the pieces together, and a lot of it, and where we see intersections, much of it is around access. So whether it's access to trans, the treatment you may need, whether it's access to HIV medications, access to contraception, and the ability to make individual autonomous decisions for yourself and for your family, they all go hand in hand. So when we looked at some of these, like the religious refusal law that passed in Indiana, and even the subsequent partial fix, it still didn't correct the ability for pharmacists to deny women contraceptives, even if they needed them for cancer treatment, which is often the case. And I also don't think that's not intentional, right? Like, there certainly is a goal to target women, and I think the LGBT community, that our opposition was very smart because they recognized, years before the marriage victory ultimately came down, that they were on the losing end. So it became a story of that they're the victims because they don't like what you're doing, but also they attached their bigotry to our momentum. And so as we were moving forward, even in some states where we were moving forward marriage legislatively, you would see amendments attached where you would make compromises to anti-discrimination protections that would affect far more than our community, and which also speaks to our organization's responsibility to clean that up. I mean, there was a huge effort among our, to have momentum, to have so many states that had marriage before you hit the Supreme Court, and we did some damage on the way. And so there's a real responsibility of our community to join with our partners and make sure that's rectified and improved.
And Naomi, with the work that your group does around LGBT families, how have you seen this come to fruition?
I mean, I think we have to recognize that even though marriage is now available, there are lots of reasons why people won't marry. And we know that nationally more children are born not into a married couple than are gay or straight. And so I think recognizing that our families have been living that experience of not being recognized and what that means. And so we are perfect advocates for thinking about broader family definitions that impact lots of communities, whether it's, here in Chicago passing, a sick days ordinance that allows you to take time off for someone other than someone to whom you're legally related, I think is really important. And we know about that, whether going back to the AIDS epidemic and needing to be able to take time off to care for a partner or a family member, someone part of your chosen family. And so I think that the families work, we have been doing that work, and organizations on this table have been doing the legal work around expanding family definitions and expanding, even if you didn't get a second parent adoption, even if you're not married, you should still be able to access and be able to visit a child for whom you parented. We had just had a court case in Maryland about de facto parenting access for a couple that the other parent didn't have a legal connection, and they split up, and the other parent didn't want that parent to have any access. And so the court said, no, you look like a duck, you walk like a duck, you're a duck, you're a parent, you've been doing the work of parenting. And I think that those are important victories for us and so many other communities. And so I think we have a lot to share about how we have been pushing institutions to change and to be more welcoming, and I think we can apply that to broader issues, and I think we have a responsibility to do that.
Mm-hmm. And Dale, in your work, certainly as a professor, and I know you work and teach classes around civil rights, and in particular as they relate to the LGBT community, how do you see this idea around institutional advocacy impacting any of the work that you're doing, or how you're talking to students, any of that?
Well, students, I think, are certainly aware that their lives are across multiple domains at one time, and so they're impacted by all of the questions that we face, and I think our advocacy needs to reflect that too. I do think organization, and we've always in some ways acknowledged the idea that gay rights, as we once called it, is more than just about anti-discrimination law. I mean, AIDS, for example, you could say, well, AIDS wasn't a gay issue because more than just gay people got it. But we recognized from the beginning, I think, how important it was to so many people. And the same thing goes for a lot of the challenges we face now.
Okay. Anything that you want to add, Tyrone, to that?
I just want to say, I think we're at a turning point in our movement in which I think there are like very clear issues, there are LGBT issues like obviously marriage, non-discrimination, which is still very much an issue that I'm trying to address. But I think once you start getting to particular of the communities that that you mentioned, mm-hmm. I think it's hard, even people honestly in the LGBT movement, particularly I would say even like white folks of a certain class, to really understand that this is an LGBT issue. I think honestly some people even in our own community don't understand how the criminal justice system, reform the criminal justice system is an LGBT issue. I think our organizations get it because we're all working on it, but I think the larger community, I think there's some work we need to do to bring our communities along, and I think that to me, I think that's a challenge, but also is really exciting because I think one of the beautiful things about being like within the LGBT community is that we can use either our sexual orientation, our gender identity to connect with people who we may not otherwise connect with, whether like other races, other ethnicities, people who are undocumented, people from other parts of the world, because I do think that being queer or trans in this world, even though there's a lot of infighting, I do think there's something about it. I think after Orlando, you saw that. Mm-hmm. And I do think I think there's a power there that we can really we can be a bridge to the larger world and saying like all these issues, everyone should have like a vibrant and wonderful life. And I think we can use our experiences as being queer or trans to really make those connections and to really translate to the larger world. And so I do think our organizations are learning how to not only kind of undo some of the damage that was done, but also how to be leaders and to bring our community, those who are not really doing the advocacy work, in on this conversation and get them like really feel invested in this. And so I think while there's a challenge, I do think we can do it. I mean, like what just happened like recently with the whole marriage thing. So I think there's an opportunity there, but I do also think on the flip side, it can become destructive, and it really depends on us as a community and what we're willing to do, and including those of us who work at at LGBT organizations. I think the next few years are going to be, I think, a really important few years.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
And I was just going to say the other piece that we didn't mention, but you sort of alluded to, was this issue around class, mm-hmm. that we don't really, sometimes we talk about things as race when really it's about class at the end of the day, and we're reluctant to say that because I think for many people, they still assume that everybody's doing great, mm-hmm. and everybody's just doing great, and we know that's not the case. We started to hear organizations talk a little bit more about poverty, and we'll talk in greater detail about that in the second panel. What did you want to add?
I just wanted to say that I think there's also kind of what organizations have been doing and how that's communicated outwardly and with funders, because to hear Jim say at the highest point marriage was only 30% of Lambda's portfolio, well, that is surprising to some people mm-hmm. who, marriage was such a public thing, and it was important that it was public. It was important, you saw the video that Richard showed earlier with his beautiful poem, like it is important that we share those stories. And plus, we have funders who are saying, oh, marriage, we're done, right? We have a huge funder that has walked
Exactly.
out of the space. And I think that, like,
Are you going to name them?
no.
No.
But I think that it's important that we as organizations tell you all what we're up
Yeah.
to, because we have been doing other work. It just hasn't been so public, or it hasn't been the lead case that's on the cover of our websites and so forth. And I love the criminal justice working group that Tyrone and I and folks from Lambda are on. Very few of those people have funded positions to solely do that. They are finding time in other things they're doing, but these organizations have said, we're going to commit to you doing that without money tied to criminal justice reform funding, right? And so we're doing it, even if we're not talking about it and funders aren't saying, I'm going to give you a grant solely for that. So I think there's more going on behind the scenes than we share all the time.
Could I add one other?
Sure, go right
one other
ahead.
thing? I do think that there is a problem of limited resources and resource allocation. I'll just tell you, I live in Dallas, Texas. The Texas legislature meets once every 2 years, and every time it meets, it's a threat to liberty and human decency. And in Texas next spring, we're going to face, I'm guessing, dozens, if not scores of bills that are directed at LGBT people. They'll take one form or another. They'll deal with bathrooms or single-sex facilities, or they'll deal with something that's called or covered as religious freedom that will be targeted at LGBT people. And in Texas, there's basically one statewide group. It has one lobbyist and a board of people who don't get paid and extremely limited funding. And so very difficult choices have to be made about where you devote those resources.
Well, and if you looked at that map of where is the red, the state groups in those states have one paid staffer,
Right.
if there's even a functioning state group.
Right. So resources.